the first person to graduate from my lab. So it's a pretty exciting but also bittersweet moment for us. She's been an exceptional student. She joined the group, she hit the ground running, and she's done a lot of this work with Alejandro. And so I'm going to ask him to come up here and give us kind of an introduction to Drew, but like the real Drew, the blackberry scrambling, like greenhouse watering, like working super hard, super smart Drew. So Alejandro, if you want to come up and just give us a couple stories about Drew before she takes off.
So I was going to introduce who Drew is, but everybody knows who Drew is here. She's a senior in the Environmental Studies Department. I met Drew about a year ago in the Environmental Leadership Program, which is a pretty tight group of people. Happy to see that a few of you guys have turned out for this event. So that was a really great group of people, and Drew came into that program as a social science student, and over the course of that program, really learned a lot about scientific methods and monitoring and restoration, and she's really built on that over the course of the lab and come up with a really great project that does a good job of actually connecting the social aspects with the science aspects in an agroecological system. And over the course of this project, Drew's worked super hard, especially out in the field site where we've had to deal with rain and heat and getting chased by wasps and like doing basically whatever we could to get the transect tape across a blackberry field, walking around and throwing it and then pulling it through and trying to find the right mark. And she's also done a really excellent job back in the lab learning for the first time for a lot of times how to work in R and do stats and make graphs and write up a scientific paper. So I just want to say thanks for all your hard work and certification.
Thank you. That was great. All right, so my name is Drew Donahue. I'm going to be presenting my undergraduate honors thesis, assessing the ecological consequences of domestic pig grazing on the understory vegetation of the oak woodland. So you guys, I guess, already know about me. I'm an environmental studies major, food studies and anthropology minor. I've been very interested in the ecological sciences, as inspired by the Environmental Leadership Program, and that's how I was introduced to Howell Lab. So I'm going to start with Oregon white oak habitats. So they're a unique habitat in the Willamette Valley. I'm specifically focusing on woodlands, which has a high cover of overstory trees of up to 80% with understory community of grassless forbs and woody plants. It's actually man-made habitat. It was traditionally maintained by natives through selective burning. And they did this for a number of reasons: food production, agriculture, hunting, and transportation. So Oregon white oak habitats have over 200 plant animal species, 45 which are at risk, and making it one of the most biologically diverse habitats in the Willamette Valley. So since the 1800s, when European settlers came, it's been reduced to less than 10% of its historic value. So in this figure from Friends of Beaufort Park in Alpeston, you can see the drastic change from the 1800s, and this is from 2004, showing that less than 10% is left. The yellow represents like oak, savanna, and grasslands, and then the brown is oak woodlands. So the biggest threat is urbanization and agriculture. Especially in Oregon, it's been mostly tree plantations and vineyards that have been taking over this habitat. And then so 96% of these little dots that remain are on private land. And so often oak stands can compete with agriculture by threatening with pests and other competition for resources. So we must see collaboration with landowners in order to save what the remaining habitat we have left. So agriculture in Oregon. So the moist, well-drained soils that are found in the valley bottoms, like in the Willamette Valley, also support the best oak habitat, but also create the most valuable farmland, which is why a lot of this habitat was removed. So population is growing currently, and so trends suggest that agricultural land will expand by another 18% by 2050. And so this is all the more reason to maintain that remaining less than 10% native landscape matrix that's left. So specifically in Oregon, so Oregon is usually known for their production of timber and Christmas trees, but they're also really known for their hazelnut production, also known as filberts locally. The oldest hazelnut orchard in Oregon is Doris Ranch, which is here in Eugene, and it was first planted in 1903. So Oregon produces 99% of U.S. hazelnuts and 5% of the world production. It doubled in the last decade and is expected to do so in 2025. And organic hazelnut production specifically has been increasing as well. So of course with any agriculture, there's always a pest involved. And so specifically the most significant pest for hazelnut production is the filbert worm, which is in this photo in the middle there. The worm causes 20 to 50% damage on the developing kernels, and it burrows into the nut. You can see in that picture there, and that's what it turns out like. So its life cycle, so a single generation emerges from late June to early October. And then it's actually a native pest. So it is, and its native host is Bourbon white oak acorns. So then this is a cause for re-invasion. A lot of landowners typically completely remove their stands in order to mitigate against this pest. So this has caused landowners to come up with an alternative in order from completely removing the stands in general. And so that sparked the interest in creating this collaboration project resolving conflict between oak conservation and organic hazelnut production. It's a collaboration project between UO, OSU, and local farmers. It's to come up with a new novel pest management strategy by removing all the nuts from the ground at the end of the season to break the moth's life cycle. So in that study, they found that pigs do prefer acorns, and then preliminary results is showing that pig grazing in oak woodland is found effective at removing infected acorns. So this could possibly be a great alternative to completely removal of the stands and pesticides too. But with any management practice, there's a risk of unintended consequences. And so many studies have been done on pigs, and they almost all show that they reduce plant layers, they increase bare ground, and they just overall show destructive behavior in the ecosystem. You can see they had already picked up some dirt here, and they reduced the layer there. This study is going to be using domestic pigs, so that's what I'm going to focus on rather than feral pigs that have been living there. They're going to be domestic pigs in a limited amount of time in that space. So domestic pigs are omnivorous. They're in the uprooting mammal category, which means they turn over soil to eat foliage, seed, and roots. Uprooting can damage ecosystems by removing entire plants and spreading invasives into bare soils. Pigs spend 52% of their day foraging and 23% in locomotion just investigating. So they spend a lot of time in the area just, not just eating the plants, but also walking around and impacting the soil. But there's been few studies on domestic pigs compared to feral pigs. And domestic pigs have been found to be less destructive than feral pigs because they're more efficient foragers. And they can be found to be beneficial to ecosystems under optimal level of disturbance by increasing species richness. So with all that background in mind, I pose the question, do domestic pigs have negative effects on the understory vegetation of an oak woodland based off of just how destructive they are in general? So I think yes, that they will have negative consequences based off of that research. And this is actually a picture before they went into the study site, and they had actually found an old weed mat and pulled it up, and they were only there for like a day. So my first hypothesis is that they will reduce the percent cover of herbaceous plants in litter, and this is all based off of my preliminary research. My second hypothesis is that they will increase the percent cover of bare ground. My third hypothesis is that they will eliminate certain herbaceous species, so I really want to focus on that layer since they're in there for a minimal amount of time. And then my fourth hypothesis, so as you can see in this picture, the understory is very thick and covered with Himalayan blackberry. So I think that areas that are more accessible, and what I mean by that is that they're either closer to the road or trail, or they just have a not as thick understory, that those areas specifically will have higher levels of bare ground or lower levels of herbaceous litter, more so than the obstructed areas. So this study was done at my brother's farm. It is an organic hazelnut farm in Creswell in the southern Willamette Valley. The farm is transitioning from annual grass seed production to a diversified orchard and ranch. Besides hazelnuts, they also produce bison, pork, hops, apples, and pumpkins. And currently they have 660 hazelnut trees on the property. Their mission is to be stewards of the land by growing a variety of crops that build soil health, increase water quality, and strengthen the community. And then that's Taylor Larson up there. He is one of the owners of my brother's farm. He helped us with the setup and a lot of other parts. He was a really big part of this project. And then, so here on the map, the red marker shows the main buildings of my brother's farm. And then up here is where the hazelnut orchards are, and then right here is the study site we're going to talk a little bit more about. So the study site where this was conducted is a 20-acre oak woodland. It is part of the remaining landscape matrix, so back to this picture, you can see it's connected to some of the other oak stands, and it connects even more, which you'll see later. It is a remnant riparian habitat. It's 1,000 feet from the coast fork of the Willamette River. It has a Mediterranean climate with cool, wet winters and hot, dry summers. It's comprised mostly of Chehalis silty lake clump. And so it's also mostly unaffected by the changing landscape surrounding that. And so what I mean by that is based off of these aerial photos. So the top one is from 1934 and the bottom one is from 2018. And so the circle in red shows the study site you saw on the previous slide. And so as you can see from these photos, it's actually mostly unaffected. It's pretty the same. It filled out a little bit more with trees later. But the landscape around it is changing it. So it's a little hard to see because this is an older photo, but there is no buildings. It's all agriculture. But here you can see buildings here and buildings here, which is urban sprawl coming from Questwell coming up. So the landscape is changing. Things are, urban sprawl is coming, and more oak and other habitats are getting removed still. But this area has been kept mostly untouched for almost 90 years. All right, so for my experimental design, I divided this oak woodland into two plots. The treatment plot is in blue and the control plot is in green. The treatment plot was then later divided into 4 pastures that the pigs would go through. They're divided here. And then the plots are separated by the same boundary. What I mean by that is there's a gravel road that runs through it, which we decided to use as a natural boundary. So the first thing that I conducted was a rapid vegetation assessment. I just wanted to get a basic understanding of just what the understory was comprised of in general and just quickly look around. What I found during this was that there's a lot of dry creek beds, particularly running through the treatment plot. A lot of remnant old river or streams and stuff, which means there's more bare ground on that side. Of course, there's also a lot of invasives, as you saw from previous pictures. And then the southern side was found to have 7% more canopy layer as well. And so this is just a basic table of the species that were most common in this site. So invasive vine, Himalayan blackberry was by far predominant. But there was also evergreen blackberry. Native vine, manroot was most predominant. There's also trailing blackberry, which is our native blackberry. For native shrubs, snowberry, Indian plum, and there was some Pacific poison oak that was running through the site. And then this whole list for herbaceous, and then the litter was mostly Oregon white oak and big leaf maple leaves. And then the trees was predominantly Oregon white oak, but there also was Oregon ash and big leaf maple running through the site as well. So to further just look at the vegetation of the site, so in the they were both relatively the same in both the control and treatment plot. The only category that was found significantly different was that in the control there was much more native vine or mostly mangrove on the control side, which you can see the star, that's the native vine, and then the green is the control, and the blue is the treatment. In order to assess if pigs had disturbance on the understory, I used vegetative percent cover, which I estimated visually. So I put 3 transects in each plot, and I used the gravel road to go from, and then here there's a vacant grass field that we went to, and then each transect had 4 quadrats on it that were at the 5, 20, and 35 and 50 meter mark respectively. And so the categories that I did vegetative percent cover for were invasive vine, native shrub, herbaceous litter, bare ground, wood, disturbed, and tree. And so the disturbed category was added later because as I was doing assessment, I found that some quadrats were disturbed by human use, as like some had mown through and then others had like a trail running partially through it. So the first data was collected in September before the treatment, and then the pigs grazed 2 weeks later. And the pigs stayed in each pasture from either 4 to 5 days. And then post-treatment data collection started in the beginning of September. And then also, as we were doing data collection, we gave each quadrat ease of access scale, which I had mentioned earlier was based off of like its relative closeness or how thick the understory is. So results were evaluated using ANOVA. The factors were pig grazing, treatment, and timing, and their interaction. And I also used 2P post-hoc pairwise comparison, the alpha value of 0.05. So my first hypothesis was that there would be a decrease in percent cover of the herbaceous litter layer, but there was found to be no significant changes between time periods. Neither the main effects of timing or pig treatment was found significant, and their interaction was not found significant either. So in this graph, it's the x-axis is pre-treatment to post-treatment with estimated percent cover on the y-axis, and then the blue is treatment and the green is control with error bars. And so there was a slight decrease in the means, but nothing was found significant through ANOVA. So my second hypothesis was that there would be an increase in bare ground. So there was no significant changes between time periods. There was a significant difference between plots before pigs were grazed, but the main effects of timing were not significant, and there was no significant interaction effect. So same axis, and then the star represents the significant point. And then there was a decrease in the means, as you can see from the graph. So my third hypothesis was that certain individual herbaceous species would be eliminated or litter. And so based off of the data, no individual species or litter was eliminated from grazing. In the treatment side, dead leaves, geranium, and Robert geranium and lichen actually increased, but nothing was eliminated from the grazing treatment. And then for my fourth hypothesis, I thought that more accessible areas would have a lower herbaceous litter and more bare ground compared to obstructed areas. But also, again, there was no significant effects on the percent cover of either of those categories within or across quadrats, and no significant interaction as well. And based off the graphs, all the means are relatively close to each other, so there really wasn't a big change there. Based off of this results, domestic pigs pose a relatively low threat to the understory vegetation of the native oak woodland when regulated through minimal time. So this is promising results. This pig grazing treatment of removing the affected acorns seemed to show that there's no damage to the understory, so this could be a productive method going forward in the future. So to further discuss my results, the herbaceous litter percent cover was not found significant, but there was a slight drop in the means, and this is most likely due to just the natural tie-off that occurs during the winter. So these are some photo points that I took. One on the left is pre-treatment, and this is post-treatment, and you can kind of see just naturally that there's a little less green in the post-treatment one. My second one, so I thought bare ground would increase, but actually it decreased. And so this was probably most likely due to the leaf fall from the canopy layer, because when I took the second round of data, a lot of the leaves from the Oregon white oaks had dropped, covering up the bare ground. So if the pigs did increase bare ground, it was not seen in the data because of the leaf cover. So my third hypothesis, not shown in the data, so no species were eliminated, but these 3 in particular did increase. And so Robert's geranium is a low-growing winter and spring annual that is becoming one of the most common woodland invaders in western Oregon, so that's most likely the reason why that increased. And then, like I said before, leaves were falling, Oregon white oak leaves, so that's why that increased. And then lichen most likely increase because it likes a wet area and it was getting more wet and colder during the winter. And then for my fourth one, so quadrats that were easier to access did not show higher levels of bare ground and lower levels of herbaceous litter in comparison to obstructed quadrats. So same reasons as the first two hypotheses, most likely due to natural die from the winter and leaf fall. They also just had a limited amount of time in the plots, so maybe they didn't have a lot of time to actually go into and find those obstructed quadrats. But another idea is that they were able to access all quadrats the same, but they just didn't show any effects on the understory. So I think, so some recommendations if this project is continued is that the data that was collected after pig grazing treatment be done before the first frost to have that not show in the data, so that way it doesn't affect that. And then I think it would be a good idea to collect percent cover data at different times of the years also to make up for that seasonal variation. Adding more quadrats I think would be a good idea to get more data into the results. And then I think they should establish permanent stem plots because this study focused more on the herbaceous litter layer rather than woody vegetation because I didn't expect it to see the first time that we did this any effects on that. But I think it would be of interest to look at that in the future and just see if they really have any effects on the woody vegetation. I also specifically think that there should be a focus on the oak seedlings. Oaks are shade intolerant, so they're already having a hard time establishing in this really thick understory that's already there. So I think any shift, like pig grazing, could affect them. So it would be of interest to focus on oak seedlings, counting, maybe even planting different oak seedlings of different ages and seeing what they prefer, a variety of other methods. And then, so grazing will continue the project to see if pigs are effective at picking up infected hazelnuts. It's going to continue for longer. So I think that this project should also continue to see if there was any long-term effects on the site. I'd like to thank Taylor Larson, who was our community partner. He allowed me to use his land to conduct this research, and he also helped a great deal with setting up everything. I'd like to thank Lauren for introducing me to this project and accepting me so quickly in the lab and finding something that interested me right away. I would particularly like to thank Alejandro for teaching me a great deal of things. This was the first time I'd ever done something quite like this, so I had a lot to learn, but it's been a really great process, and I feel really accomplished. And I also want to thank Calvin, who is doing the study, seeing if the infected acorns are effectively grazed by pigs, and he also helped me a lot with this project and adding to it and helping me edit, and everyone else at Hallett Lab for helping me through the editing process and giving me great ideas. And then the environmental studies program, they gave us the applied science C grant that we were able to even start this project with and allowing me to present.
What inspired you?
I have a great interest in oak habitats. I did an internship with Beaufort Park, which is why I had that figure, and I always think that figure is really impactful. And so I really wanted to look more at oak woodlands and savanna since they're such a unique habitat and changing a lot. So I thought this would be a great project to start with.
So does the filbert worms, like, do they only infect the acorns and ground, or they end up in trees eventually?
I think Calvin would be better at explaining this than me, but they burrow into the acorns and then they drop from the tree and then they turn to mocks later and then lay their eggs again in the acorns. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If the pigs are eating the acorns off the ground, do you think that would affect the oaks being able to grow from seed, to reestablish in this habitat?
That's a good question. I didn't look into that, but I would imagine so, that they're removing some of the acorns from the ground. And so some are already infected, so they're not going to grow anyways, but a lot of them are healthy too, so I would imagine that they would, that would also
What was the common age of the stand? Like how many old oaks were there? Or is it mostly young ones?
Well, I know that these oaks are at least 90 years old based off of the aerial photos. I don't know how old exactly they are. When I did my internship at Friends of Beaufort Park, I specifically looked at legacy trees, which are the older ones that have the more like mushroom canopy. I didn't see any of those here. I didn't see anything with mushroom canopy, but it is a woodland, so they're growing more like confined because they're competing with each other. So I don't think they're super old, but they're definitely over 100 years old, and they have been there for a while.
So seems like you have to run the pigs through after the acorns have dropped, so that's later in the season, like the fall. Do you think if the need was to run the pigs through in the spring, you would have seen a different set of results?
Yeah, possibly. I really think this season's affected the results a little bit. I still think it showed, some of their effects, but I think it would have been maybe more specific if we had done it in the spring. Yeah. So that's why I suggested doing it at different times, really, to see if there was any effect, or more effect than what I saw in my results from this.
Do pigs scatter around the pasture, or do they kind of move around in groups?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't, when I was researching how pigs behave, they didn't really mention that. I'm trying to remember what they did when I saw them. They seem to relatively stay near each other, but I mean, the pastures aren't like really big, so like there wasn't a whole lot of space for them to go anyway. So they're all pretty similar area, I guess I would say, but I'm not exactly sure.
So like the quadrats would have about equal amount of treatment. I'm saying, like, yeah, if the pasture is so big and like the pigs are clumping, then other, the quadrats near the pigs will have more damage than the other quadrats. But
Also, the transects didn't go all the way through the pastures. The quadrats were actually relatively close to the road, which is where they launched them into. So the quadrats probably even had a better chance than some of the vegetation in the back of getting the treatment.
Any questions for Drew?
Would you suggest any changes to the pig treatment going forwards? So not necessarily the monitoring, but like how long the pigs are in for, how quickly they move, how big the pastures are.
I mean, it would be interesting to see if they stayed in longer, if they had a more effect, which I think they would. But we don't. To see if they get the infected acorns, we don't need them to stay in longer. So I mean, like, just seeing their effects of just that minimal time, I think would be more beneficial. I think it would be, like I said, more quadrats to go all the way through the plot, just to see if they really do go through the whole area in that amount of time. And I think that would be the thing I would change.
What is the average wind speed?
Oh, I don't remember.
What is your favorite color?
Yeah, please join me in thanking Drew. That was awesome.
Thank you for all coming, guys. This was great just to present to you guys. So.